Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
5 years after the passage of the IIJA, attention is shifting from getting money out to making sure projects move and results show up. Oversight is finding persistent issues that could shape how that plays out. Joining Federal Drive host Terry Gerton earlier to discuss how this is affecting the EPA specifically is Senior Advisor to the EPA Inspector General, Kate Robinson.
Let's talk about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. If people remember that, it's about 5 years old now. It gave the EPA $60 billion worth of money to fund a variety of programs. What kind of projects fall under EPA's purview here?
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Terry. Yeah, the IIJA did fund about $60 billion, and it really was a historic investment for the EPA. This really provided funding for about 19 EPA programs. And these are really, I would say mainly focused on water infrastructure. However, there's additional funds for community cleanups, revitalization, recycling efforts. But you also have clean school bus and some pollution prevention.
And so how would you describe where things stand now in terms of execution?
Yeah, so we talked about how much money the EPA has received, but the EPA really started receiving those funds in fiscal year 2022. And they just received the last allocation this fiscal year in 2026. And so even though that was the end of the allocation, it's important to know that a lot of these funds are available until they're expended or until they're spent. And as our report explains, at the end of January, the agency has obligated just under $40 billion. And then they had outlays of just about over $16 billion. So for listeners that may not really be familiar with obligations and outlays, an obligation is something where the government has set aside funds for a particular program, and then an outlay is when the money is spent. So one way to think about it is if you set aside money for a new car, that would be an obligation. And then when you put down the down payment or make a payment on that car, that is the outlay. So back to your question, as we discussed in the report, EPA has obligated over 70% of the IIJA funds and has spent about 40% of that. And then, as we spoke, a lot of that's for the water infrastructure projects, and then some cleanup efforts, and some smaller programs like the clean school bus and pollution prevention.
And what's keeping that last chunk of several $billion from getting allocated to its projects?
So I think a lot of these projects, environmental infrastructure projects, they can take a little bit longer. And so a lot of our reports kind of talk about and touch on some things like capacity issues. They can talk about timeliness, some of the guidance, some needs for the programs to get those funds out. So fortunately, those funds are there and they're available for when the programs and the communities need them.
And your oversight has shifted a little bit now that much of the money has been obligated and the projects are beginning. What are you seeing now that you couldn't see as you've looked at these in the past 3 reports?
Well, Terry, I would say that we are seeing both positive results, and then we're also seeing some areas where the agency can really improve on their implementation and their oversight of the funding. And so, one of the programs that we have seen an impact on is the agency's use of the IIJA funds for what is called their Class 6 well program. And so what the agency had done with that is they really improved and increased their staffing. They provided additional training. They've upgraded different types of tools for that program, and they have better guidance. They also have boosted some of their guidance for their stakeholders and stakeholder engagement for water infrastructure projects. And so what it really does, it really helps communities access those IIJA funds for both drinking water projects and clean water projects.
Kate Robinson is Senior Advisor to the Inspector General at the Environmental Protection Agency. Kate, the report points to some weaknesses in post-award monitoring. As you said up front, a lot of these projects are done in collaboration with states and with tribal territories. What makes that post-award monitoring so challenging?
I would say as funds move from obligation to expenditure, that it's really important for the agency to closely monitor that money and to ensure that the recipients are protecting the funds and that they're delivering results. So, really this is critical to preventing fraud, waste, and abuse of these taxpayer dollars. So something that was flagged with the post-award monitoring and for EPA is that they didn't really have controls in place. to ensure that those regional offices were monitoring those post-award grants in accordance with the required post-award monitoring plans, and that they weren't conducting regular post-award monitoring reviews. So really this comes down to an issue of guidance. And so the EPA didn't issue guidance in a timely manner, and they didn't have controls in place to track, to assess, or to provide feedback on those post-award monitoring plans. So really the timely, complete, and accurate guidance really is crucial for both the EPA and the recipients of IIJA funding. And the EPA is taking steps to address our recommendations.
Right. So you have looked at these projects as they've gone along sort of independently, and now you've collected these findings into a comprehensive report. You have seen interim progress as you've made those recommendations then?
We have seen interim progress as we're making some recommendations, yes.
One of the other points that comes out in this summary report is a capacity issue, especially at the state and local level, to manage these projects. How much of that challenge now is whether the system can really absorb and execute this level of funding?
Yeah, Terry, that's a great question. And we actually have a series of reports that are looking at this very issue. So we've looked at New Mexico, we've looked at South Carolina, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands. And as you know, every state and territory is going to have its own unique challenges. But we did see some themes that we observed that impact the state's ability to get the money out to the communities. So, for example, we saw that the small communities and water systems, they either were not aware of the funding, or they struggled with staffing or technical expertise that was needed to apply for, plan, and ultimately complete the SRF projects. So we also found that there was some competing funding opportunities, and that can impact whether communities sought out SRF loans. And we saw how project delays can really impact that progress. So, really many states require SRF projects to be shovel ready. And what that means is that the project is fully planned, it's permitted, and it's engineered so that the physical construction can begin once those funds have been received. So while some communities may have projects that are shovel ready, others may need more time to get the projects to that phase.
You use the term SRF, and I just want to be clear, the state revolving funds. Talk to us a little bit about how that works. It's a very unique feature for EPA.
It is a unique feature. It's very technical, but really they're funds that the states get from the agency, and that those funds go into a pot and they essentially revolve. And so they can pull out funds and then work, and then they're in that pot until they're ready to be used.
So, Kate, as the projects that are funded under the IIJA move forward, what's at the top of the IG's concerns here in terms of making sure that these projects actually get executed and they deliver the results that are expected?
I think what we're watching for here, really is if the projects are being completed and if they are delivering those results. So our oversight really is twofold, Terry. For the EPA, we are looking to see the agency continue to complete corrective actions and take in our lessons learned that we have identified for them on their programs. And we want to see them get the remainder of the IIJA funding out to communities. And we will be monitoring how they are doing that and how they are overseeing the recipients and monitoring those projects and results. So at this point, we're also looking at individual recipients and how recipients are using the money. So we have an upcoming report that should be issued soon regarding one of our National Estuary Program recipients. And that identifies how they are following requirements and if they're making progress. We also have ongoing work similarly looking at requirements and progress for the city of Seattle for a EPA grant for their recycling program. So I think really, Terry, at the end of the day, our role is to identify and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, and help the agency be effective stewards of this significant taxpayer investment.
Kate Robinson is Senior Advisor to the Inspector General at the Environmental Protection Agency. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.